The restaurant on the top floor of the Argentum Hotel was designed for elegance. Tall windows framed the city skyline. Tables were dressed in white linen and gold-rimmed plates. Soft jazz hummed in the background, and every server moved like they were part of a silent ballet. It was the kind of place where wealth wasn't spoken, it was worn, shown, and expected, and into that world walked a man in worn jeans, a dark hoodie, and slightly scuffed black boots that he didn't look around, didn't scan for attention. He moved with a quiet steadiness as though he'd walked into thousands of rooms like this, and still didn't quite feel welcome in any of them. He approached the host's desk. "Just one," he said. The hostess glanced up and paused. Her smile froze. She gave him a quick look, from the unshaved jaw to the simple canvas jacket, and said with strained politeness, "We have a dress code, sir. It's strictly enforced after 5 p.m. "I understand," he said, calmly. "But I was told I had a reservation." She looked skeptical. "Under what name?" "Reeves." She typed slowly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then her brows lifted in visible surprise. "Yes, well, all right," she said, recovering. "Please wait one moment." She whispered something to a waiter who was passing by, a young man in a tight vest and high chin. He looked at Keanu. Then at his clothes. Then let out a small laugh and said louder than he should have, "Probably came up from the street cafe. Bet he got lost." A second waiter smirked, standing by the espresso bar. "Maybe he thinks this is the lobby lounge." They didn't whisper. Keanu heard everything, but he didn't flinch. He stood still. Hands in his coat pockets. Looking past them, quietly, the hostess came back. "We've prepared a table at the back. Near the side windows." Keanu nodded once. "Thank you." The waiter led him through the room slowly, far too slowly, as if making sure every table had a chance to look. He leaned in just before they reached the table and whispered, "This section's usually empty. Guests don't like it much. But maybe it's more your style." Keanu looked at him. No smile. "Just stillness." "It'll be fine," he said softly, but the waiter wasn't done. "Can I get you water?" he asked. "Or maybe you brought your own." A few diners nearby chuckled. One even shook their head and said under their breath, "He must be someone's grandfather." Keanu sat, slowly. Placed his hands on the table. Looked out the window, and said nothing, because what they didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that this man who looked like a forgotten traveler didn't just eat in hotels like this, that he owned them, not through inheritance. Not through bragging, but through quiet investment, trust, and decades of humility, and this restaurant, it was one of 3 he had quietly acquired a share of in the last year, but tonight, he didn't say a word, not yet, because sometimes, the loudest part of a story, is the moment right before the truth speaks back. The murmurs hadn't stopped. Keanu was still sitting at the corner table, back straight, napkin untouched, water glass full. He hadn't placed an order, not because he couldn't, but because no one had given him a menu. Across the room, the maitre d' whispered something to the head server, who raised an eyebrow and smirked. A group of well-dressed patrons near the bar tilted their heads toward the scene. One woman leaned in to her husband and murmured, "That man must have walked in by mistake. He doesn't look like he even belongs in the lobby." He heard it. He heard all of it, but Keanu didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor in front of him, watching the reflections of chandeliers ripple across the polished tiles like water. Then a waiter approached again, not the same one from before, this one younger, sharper, more aggressive in his posture, sir, he said, leaning forward with a tone of exaggerated patience. We've had a few guests express concern. This area is reserved for formal dining. Are you lost? Keanu looked up. Slowly. Calmly, no, he said, voice level. I was seated here. The waiter's eyes narrowed. By whom? The gentleman at the front, Keanu replied. The waiter straightened. I find that hard to believe. Without asking, he pulled the chair across from Keanu out and sat down, legs spread slightly, elbows on the table. He leaned in as if he were interrogating a trespasser, not addressing a guest. Listen, he said quietly. I don't know how you got past the front desk, but this isn't a coffee shop. We don't do walk-ins. We don't do t-shirts and leather jackets. This is the Ardesia. This table alone requires a booking 3 weeks in advance and a jacket. Keanu didn't flinch. I'm not here by mistake, he said again. The waiter laughed under his breath. You know what? Fine. What do you want to eat? He pulled out a small notepad. We've got Wagyu tenderloin, foie gras, halibut. Let me guess, just a salad. Keanu looked down at his hands. I'd actually prefer the chef's tasting menu. The waiter blinked. Then snorted, oh, really? You know that runs $460 a head. Not including the wine pairings, of course. Or is sparkling water a splurge? Another burst of laughter from a nearby table. The sound was sharp, cruel. Keanu could feel it in the base of his spine, not the volume, but the intention that he didn't respond, not to defend himself. Not to explain, that he simply placed his hands gently on the table and said, I'll wait. The waiter stood abruptly. You'll be waiting a while, friend. He walked away loudly, making sure the tables he passed heard him when he muttered, what a joke. Keanu sat in silence. The restaurant buzzed with tension now, but none of it touched him, until the maitre d' returned. This time, his tone wasn't fake polite, it was cold, clipped, and managerial. Sir, he said. We've reviewed our records. There is no reservation under your name, nor under any known guest affiliated with you. Keanu looked at him. I didn't make the reservation under my own name. The maitre d' scoffed. Of course you didn't. Keanu raised an eyebrow. I was invited. By whom? There was a pause. A long one. And then Keanu simply replied, you'll know soon enough. The maitre d's expression darkened. I don't care who you think you are. You're not going to intimidate my staff. This is a place of refinement, and frankly, you're making people uncomfortable. One of the guests, a man in a pinstriped suit sipping wine, nodded in agreement. Just have him escorted out, the man called. He's obviously confused. Another chimed in, honestly, it's pathetic. Is he here to audition for a movie? Because that look is 5 years too old. Laughter followed, not all of it malicious, some of it just blind, groupthink arrogance. But none of it saw the man they were mocking. Keanu finally stood up, the room stilled, expecting a scene, but all he did was take a step back from the table, and say softly, you know, it's always fascinating how quickly respect disappears, when you think no one's watching. He looked at the maitre d', and how small people become, when they think they're bigger than someone else. Then he sat down again, peacefully, still waiting, because what was coming hadn't arrived yet. The laughter had started again. After the first wave of snide comments, the staff had pulled back just enough to stay professional, offering curt, forced apologies, but never quite removing the disdain from their eyes. And now, as Keanu Reeves sat quietly at his table in the corner of the luxury hotel restaurant, hands folded, posture still, the mockery had returned like a tide that refused to stay out. Another waiter passed by and muttered, just loud enough, "We should start charging for table space. This guy's been sitting here for half an hour and hasn't ordered anything more than tea." The hostess smirked. "Maybe he's saving up for dessert." Laughter again, sharper this time. One of the busboys stood a few feet away, arms crossed, whispering to another, "He looks like he walked off the street. What's he doing in a place like this?" It was always the same. When Keanu entered a room without the armor of fame, without stylists or security, without flashing cameras, he became invisible. Or worse, disposable, and he let them think it, because he was waiting, not for food, not for service, but for clarity. He glanced up now, not in anger, but with a calm so deep it made the air feel heavier. Then the maitre d' returned, the same one who had ignored him earlier, then scoffed at his reservation request, then walked away as if Keanu were a bother to the reputation of the room. "Sir," the maitre d' said, voice dripping with false courtesy, "I'm going to have to ask you to release the table if you don't intend to place a proper order. We do have a dress code, and our regulars are arriving shortly." Keanu looked up, and said nothing. "You see," the man continued, clearly enjoying himself now, "we serve patrons. Not wanderers." The last word was sharp. Cruel. The word wasn't about clothes. It was about class. Keanu's tea was still warm. But he didn't drink it. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a black leather folder. He placed it on the table, opened it, and slid a document across the crisp white tablecloth. The maitre d's eyes dropped, more annoyed than curious, until he saw the heading, Acquisition Contract, the Monarch Group, owner name, Keanu C. Reeves, effective control, full property transfer, locations, New York, Chicago, Paris, Hong Kong, Zurich, Dubai. The man's lips parted slightly. The words were clear. The seal was real. The signature at the bottom was fresh. He blinked, then blinked again. Keanu finally spoke. His voice was low, unshaken, dead calm. "I bought this chain last week." The hostess had stopped mid-step, still holding a tray. One of the laughing waiters dropped the stack of napkins he was carrying. Keanu continued, each word a scalpel. "I was considering closing this location. Quietly. Without notice. But I wanted to see how it felt first. I wanted to sit here. To be treated like no one." The maitre d' opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Keanu leaned forward just slightly, eyes never leaving his. "And now I know." Silence, not a stunned silence. Not even awkward. It was a collapse. Every laugh died. Every whispered insult cracked in the minds that had spoken them. "Sir," the maitre d' finally choked out, "if we had known." "That's the problem," Keanu interrupted. "You only respect people when you think they can do something for you." He stood now, and the entire room, staff, patrons, even management, turned to follow him with their eyes, but he didn't raise his voice. Didn't demand that. He just turned to the maitre d' and said one final thing, "You don't serve people like me." Pause. "You serve people. Or you don't serve at all." And then he left. Behind him, plates clattered, chairs shifted, voices whispered in shame. The manager had already stepped out from the office in a panic, grabbing the maitre d' by the sleeve, trying to ask what had happened, but no one had answers. because the man they had humiliated for being less had just walked out owning everything they stood on, and the shame they felt, it wasn't because he had exposed them, that it was because they had exposed themselves. The maitre d' stood frozen, his face caught between confusion and dread, as Keanu Reeves quietly returned to his seat. No1 moved. The entire restaurant had become a portrait of discomfort. The waiters, who just moments ago had been laughing and whispering behind polished silver trays, now stared down at the floor. A nearby couple, mid-toast, had stopped mid-clink. Even the pianist in the corner paused between notes, his fingers hovering above the keys. Keanu reached for the cloth napkin on the table, unfolded it slowly, and laid it gently across his lap. He didn't speak, that he didn't need to, because someone else had started walking toward him. A tall man in a dark suit, flanked by two silent assistants, cut across the dining room with a purposeful stride. He didn't pause for greetings. Didn't stop to acknowledge the staff. He walked straight to Keanu's table and extended his hand. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice steady but layered with apology. "I'm so sorry." Keanu looked up, calm. "You must be Mr. Delgado." The man nodded. Delgado was the regional CEO of the entire luxury hotel chain. The same man whose signature was on every employee training document. The one whose photo hung in the hallway near the executive office. The one the staff whispered about but had never seen in person. "I came as soon as I was alerted," Delgado continued. "I didn't believe the report. I couldn't. But then I watched the security footage." He looked over his shoulder at the staff, whose faces had turned pale. "I saw them snickering behind the bar. Rolling their eyes when you asked for a table. Serving you last. Ignoring you for 20 minutes. He turned back to Keanu, "And I saw you. Sitting quietly. Saying nothing." Keanu gave the smallest of nods. Delgado continued, voice firm now, "Mr. Reeves, this isn't just a restaurant. It's the flagship of our brand. The one you helped save during the lockdown. The one you invested in personally. The 1 inch." He turned sharply to face the maitre d', "you own 40% of." A gasp swept the room. The maitre d' stumbled back a step. A waiter dropped a fork. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." But Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't even meet their eyes. Instead, he said, quietly, "I didn't want anyone to know. I came to see how it felt, to be treated without a name." Delgado closed his eyes, his jaw clenched. "I'll handle this," he said. "Everyone responsible will be terminated immediately." But Keanu lifted a hand. "No," Delgado blinked. "Sir. Let them stay," Keanu said. The staff turned sharply. "What?" the maitre d' muttered under his breath. "I don't want them fired," Keanu continued, his voice stronger now, not louder, but firmer. "I want them to come to work tomorrow. And the day after that. And every day until they understand the kind of service they were hired to offer, not to names, but to people." One of the waiters looked down, tears quietly pooling in his eyes. "You don't need to punish them," Keanu said, turning his gaze toward Delgado. "You just need to let them face what they did. In front of every guest who saw them do it." A long silence followed. Then, slowly, the older hostess, the one who had once refused to speak to him, stepped forward. Her voice was small, but real. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for not seeing you." Keanu looked at her, gently. "You don't need to see me," he said. "You just need to see everyone." He stood up. Delgado asked, "Will you stay?" We'll prepare your meal privately. On the rooftop. Keanu looked around the room, then at the staff still frozen in their shame. No, he said that he took a final glance at the corner table. At the untouched water glass. The unused utensils. The napkin folded now on the chair. Then he turned to the maitre d' and said, "Next time, don't judge someone by the coat they walk in with. Judge them by how they leave." And with that, he walked toward the exit. No spotlight. No applause, just footsteps echoing on marble, and behind him, a room that had to sit in the silence he left behind, the silence of recognition, of regret, and of something deeper than in punishment could teach, the cost of assuming someone has nothing, when they've already given more than you'll ever know. The dining room had gone still, for the first time all evening. There were no plates being cleared, no forks scraping porcelain. Even the kitchen doors had stopped swinging. The tension sat in the air, not loud, but dense. The kind that fills your lungs when something sacred is about to happen, or break. Keanu Reeves stood at the center of the room, still wearing the same faded flannel, dark jeans, worn leather boots. His posture was steady, not defiant, not proud. Just still. And in that stillness, the entire restaurant felt the weight of their own performance collapsing. Across from him stood the head waiter, still flushed from shouting. Around him, younger staff shifted nervously, now realizing they'd said things they couldn't take back. "You know what's funny?" Keanu said, softly, almost like he was talking to himself. "You never once asked who I was." He wasn't smiling anymore, not like he had when they mocked his old boots, not like he had when they asked if he needed directions to the cafe downstairs. Not like he had when they slid the bill across the table before he'd even finished his tea. The smirk had left. What was left now was truth. "You just looked at me," Keanu continued, "and saw someone you decided was worth less." The words hit like a mirror. "And that's fine," he said. "I don't need attention. I don't need the best table. I don't even need service." He paused, but she did. All eyes turned to the elderly woman still seated across from his table, small, dignified, and trembling now in the center of the room. His aunt. His father's sister. The woman who'd raised him when he had nothing. The one person who called him by his full name, without fame attached. "She didn't come here to be seen," Keanu said. "She came here because I told her this place would treat her well." He looked directly at the head waiter now. "You made her feel like a burden. Like her cane was in the way. Like her laugh was too loud. Like her questions didn't matter." The waiter's mouth opened. No sound came. "You didn't fail because you didn't know who I was," Keanu continued. "You failed because you thought you knew who she was." A silence deeper than guilt settled across the floor, and then, a door opened at the back of the room. Out stepped the general manager. Older. Composed. But visibly shaken. He walked straight through the center aisle, stopped next to the head waiter and turned to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "I had no idea you were here tonight." "That," Keanu replied, "isn't the problem." The manager lowered his head. "I've seen the way you treat your high-profile guests," Keanu continued. "I've seen the champagne, the compliments, the rehearsed smiles." He looked around at the now silent diners, many of whom were pretending not to record. "And I've also seen what happens when someone walks in without a name that gets whispered." He turned to his aunt. "Would you like to leave?" he asked her. She looked around the room, then at him. "I'd rather finish my dessert," she said, with a tiny smirk that a ripple of laughter moved through the tension. Keanu smiled at last, not for the room, but for her. then he sat down again, calmly, like the storm hadn't just torn through the room and changed the air in everyone's lungs. The manager stammered forward. "Please, let us count the entire—" "No," Keanu said simply. "She's not here for your apology cake." He picked up his fork, took a bite of the dessert she had insisted he try. Then added, "But you should probably comp everyone else." The room exhaled. The staff froze. The manager blinked. "Excuse me?" Keanu's voice never changed. "Everyone saw it," he said. "Everyone heard it. You may want to make sure their lasting memory of this place isn't the sound of you yelling at an old woman's nephew." It wasn't a threat that it was a mirror, and for once, the reflection wasn't flattering. The next morning, the hotel buzzed for all the wrong reasons: calls from media, guests requesting cancellations, a dozen influencers tagging the location, quoting screenshots, and stitching videos with captions like, "This is how you disrespected Keanu Reeves." But Keanu? He hadn't posted a word. No tweets. No interviews. No press statement. That he simply returned. Same hotel, same entrance, but not the same energy. The staff stood straighter now, some out of shame, others out of fear. The maitre d', who had insulted him the night before, wasn't on shift. Rumors said he had been temporarily reassigned. But Keanu didn't ask. He walked into the restaurant slowly, like a man unbothered by the noise but carrying every moment of it in his silence. That he wore the same clothes. A worn blazer, a plain black shirt, dark jeans. Clean, but not luxurious. At his side, a woman in a modest uniform. One of the cleaning staff. Elderly. Quiet. Forgotten by most that he had met her on his way out the night before. She had whispered thank you for standing tall, for not shouting, for reminding everyone they were wrong. So now, he invited her to breakfast. They walked together through the dining hall. The same hostess from yesterday stepped forward, eyes wide. "Mr. Reeves, sir, please forgive." "No need," he said softly. "We're here for a meal, like anyone else." They were escorted to a table, the best one this time. Center of the room. Panoramic view, but Keanu didn't sit yet. That he looked around once. At every table. At every staff member who had looked away yesterday. At every guest who had whispered. Then he said, "You judged me for what I wore, not for how I carried myself." Silence, and when I was kind, you mistook it for weakness. But here's the thing, he looked down at the woman beside him, who now held back tear. When you only give respect to people who look powerful, you forget who actually has power. Then he Saturday, and people around the room clapped, not loudly, but sincerely, and no one looked at their phones. They just watched, because they knew he hadn't come for revenge. That he came to remind them that dignity isn't given by uniforms or name tag. It's something you protect. For yourself. For others, even when no one's watching.